Something feels wrong with work in America, not in a way that's easy to point to, not in a way that shows up clearly on a chart or a headline, but in a way people feel every day. You feel it on Sunday nights when the week hasn't even started yet. You feel it on Monday mornings before anything has actually gone wrong. You feel it even on days when work goes fine. People are still working. Jobs still exist. Offices are still open. Paychecks still arrive. And yet, a quiet unease has settled in. People aren't just tired, they're unsettled. Listen to how people talk now. I don't know how secure this really is. I'm busy all the time, but I don't feel stable. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I still feel anxious. What's striking is how widespread this feeling has become. Large national workplace and psychology surveys consistently show that a majority of American workers report ongoing stress related to work, not just during crises, not just during layoffs, but as a steady background condition. This isn't the stress of a deadline, it's the stress of uncertainty. For decades, work in America carried a clear promise. Work hard, and life will move forward. Stay productive, and stability will follow. Build a career, and meaning will come with it. That promise shaped how people organized their lives, how they measured progress, how they understood success. But today, many people are quietly discovering something unsettling. They followed the rules, and the rules no longer seem to work the way they were supposed to. You can be employed and still feel insecure. You can be productive and still feel disposable. You can be successful on paper and still feel like you're standing on unstable ground. And one word keeps surfacing again and again. Replaceable. Not always spoken, but felt. Felt when companies talk about efficiency instead of people. Felt when decisions happen faster, further away, and with less explanation. Felt when loyalty no longer guarantees safety. What's different now isn't that work has become difficult. Work has always been difficult. What's different is that people no longer trust what their effort leads to. Surveys in recent years show that confidence in long-term job security has declined, even among people who are currently employed. That matters more than any headline number because confidence shapes how people live day to day. When you don't trust the future, even the present becomes exhausting. You can work long hours if you believe they lead somewhere. You can sacrifice time if you trust the direction. But when the destination feels uncertain, every demand feels heavier. This is why burnout today often doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't always look like collapse or quitting. Often it looks like emotional flatness, like disengagement, like doing what's required without feeling connected to it. People aren't walking away from work because they hate responsibility. They're questioning work because it no longer answers the questions it used to answer. Who am I becoming through this? What is all of this actually for? And why does it feel like I'm always running but never arriving? There's a deeper layer to this that rarely gets named. For a long time, work wasn't just how people earned money. It was how they measured worth. Your role mattered. Your progress mattered. Being needed mattered. But now, many people feel like their value is constantly being reassessed, quietly, automatically, impersonally. And when your sense of worth depends on systems you don't control, anxiety becomes the default. You're allowed to rest, but briefly. You're allowed to slow down, but not too much. You're allowed to feel proud, but not secure. The message is subtle but constant. Keep proving. Keep producing. Keep justifying your place. Psychologists have noted that chronic workplace stress today isn't just about workload. It's about pressure combined with uncertainty, effort without assurance. And the human mind was never designed for that. It wasn't designed to perform indefinitely under evaluation. It wasn't designed to feel replaceable every day. It wasn't designed to find meaning solely through output. And yet, that's exactly what many people are trying to do, without even realizing it. So when people say, I don't know what's wrong with me, a more honest question might be, what if nothing is wrong with you? What if the problem isn't that people are failing work, but that work has slowly taken on a role it was never meant to play? This feeling, this quiet anxiety, this exhaustion without collapse, didn't appear overnight. And it isn't random. It follows a pattern that has appeared before in other societies at other moments in history. And to understand why work feels so heavy now, we have to look at how it gradually became something more than work, something people were never meant to carry alone. Most people think burnout happens when something goes wrong, when work becomes overwhelming, when life falls apart. But what's happening now is different. Today, burnout is increasingly showing up even when things appear fine. People are meeting expectations. They're hitting deadlines. They're showing up. And still, something inside feels drained. This is one of the most confusing parts of the current moment, because when there's no obvious failure, people turn the blame inward. They tell themselves they should be grateful. They should be motivated. They should be able to handle this. And when they can't, they assume the problem is personal. But the pattern tells a different story. In recent years, psychologists and workplace researchers have observed that burnout is no longer driven mainly by overwork alone. It's driven by a mix of constant pressure, unclear boundaries, and a loss of control over outcomes. In other words, it's not just how much people work, it's how little certainty they feel about what their work actually secures. You can push yourself hard if you believe effort leads to stability. But when effort no longer guarantees anything, the same work feels heavier. This is why anxiety has quietly become the emotional backdrop of modern work. Not panic, not crisis, but a low-level tension that never fully turns off. People describe it as always being on edge, always feeling like they should be doing more, always worrying that slowing down might cost them something. And what makes this worse is that the rules keep changing. Skills that mattered a few years ago suddenly feel outdated. Career paths that once felt linear now feel fragile. Decisions that used to feel safe now feel temporary. Even positive changes carry anxiety with them. A promotion can feel like more exposure instead of security. A new opportunity can feel like a test instead of progress. Flexibility can feel like instability rather than freedom. This constant recalibration takes a psychological toll. Large national surveys have found that a significant number of American workers report feeling emotionally drained by work, not because they are incapable, but because they feel under constant evaluation. And when evaluation never ends, rest stops being restorative. Time off doesn't feel like recovery, it feels like falling behind. So people keep going. They check messages after hours. They think about work while trying to sleep. They measure their days by productivity instead of presence. And slowly, something important erodes. Not motivation, but meaning. Work starts to feel like motion without direction, effort without arrival. This is why so many people say they feel burnt out, but struggle to explain what exactly they're burned out from. It's not one task. It's not one boss. It's not one bad week. It's the feeling that no matter how much you give, the ground beneath you never fully settles. And there's another layer that makes this even heavier. Modern work doesn't just demand effort, it demands identity. People are asked implicitly to define themselves by what they do, to introduce themselves through titles, to measure their growth through output. When work goes well, that can feel rewarding. But when work becomes uncertain, identity becomes fragile. If your sense of self depends on performance, then instability doesn't just threaten income. It threatens who you believe you are. This is where anxiety deepens. Because now failure isn't just about losing a job, it's about losing a sense of worth. And even the most capable people feel this, especially the capable ones. High performers often internalize pressure more deeply. They're used to being reliable, used to adapting, used to carrying weight. But when the system itself becomes unpredictable, adaptation turns into exhaustion. There's no finish line, no moment where you can finally relax, just the sense that you have to stay useful, to stay safe. And the human mind wasn't built for that. It wasn't built to feel conditional every day. It wasn't built to constantly justify its existence through output. This is why so many people describe a strange contradiction. They say, I'm doing okay, but they don't feel okay. They're functioning, but they're not grounded. They're moving, but they're not anchored. This isn't weakness. It's a signal that something essential is missing from how work fits into life. And to understand what that is, we have to step back even further, beyond modern offices, beyond current policies, beyond this particular economy. Because this pattern didn't begin with emails or algorithms or corporate culture. It began the moment work stopped being just something humans did and started becoming something humans depended on for meaning. When work begins to carry meaning it was never designed to hold, other parts of life start to thin out. Not all at once. Quietly, gradually, people still have relationships, still have routines, still have moments of rest. But something changes in how connected those things feel. Time becomes fragmented, attention becomes divided, presence becomes conditional. And slowly, people begin to feel alone, even when they aren't. In recent years, psychologists have described a growing sense of disconnection among working adults. Not isolation in the physical sense, but emotional distance. A feeling of being surrounded by people, yet rarely feeling fully seen. Work plays a role in this. When energy is spent managing pressure, there's less left for relationships. When schedules are unpredictable, connection becomes harder to maintain. When worth feels conditional, vulnerability starts to feel risky. People withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they're depleted. This is how loneliness creeps in without announcing itself. Not as emptiness, but as quiet distance. And the irony is that many people are more connected digitally than ever. Messages travel instantly. Meetings happen constantly. Notifications never stop. But connection isn't the same as closeness. Closeness requires safety, time, a sense that you don't have to perform. When life feels like constant evaluation, people bring that posture everywhere. They measure conversations. They manage impressions. They keep parts of themselves guarded, even outside of work. This is why so many people say they feel like they're always on, even when they're supposed to be off. There's no clear boundary between effort and rest anymore, between role and self. And when those lines blur long enough, the nervous system never fully settles. Psychologists have noted that chronic stress doesn't just affect mood, it affects how people relate to others. It narrows focus. It reduces patience. It makes connection feel like another demand instead of a source of renewal. So people retreat inward. They scroll, they distract, they numb. Not because they're lazy or indifferent, but because they're overloaded. And underneath this is a deeper loss that's harder to measure, a loss of shared meaning. For much of human history, work existed within a larger structure of life. Family, community, belief, ritual. Those things gave people a sense of place and something stable that didn't just shift with performance or productivity. But as work took on more weight, those structures quietly weakened. People moved for jobs. Schedules fragmented communities. Shared rhythms disappeared. Life became efficient, but thin. This is why so many people describe a strange emptiness that success doesn't fix. They reach milestones. They earn more. They gain status. And still, something feels missing. Because meaning doesn't come from movement alone. It comes from belonging. And belonging can't survive in a system where everything feels conditional. This is where anxiety deepens into something more existential. People don't just worry about tomorrow's workload. They worry about who they're becoming inside a system that never pauses. They worry about whether their lives are adding up to something real, whether they're known beyond what they produce, whether they matter when they stop performing. And this worry often stays unspoken, because admitting it feels risky. It feels like weakness in a culture that values resilience and output. So people carry it quietly. They function. They comply. They keep going. But inside, many feel unanchored. This is the hidden cost of a culture where work becomes the primary source of identity. When work provides stability, identity feels solid. When work becomes uncertain, identity fractures. And that fracture shows up everywhere, in relationships and mental health, in the way people experience time itself. Days blur together, weeks feel fast but empty. Life becomes something to get through rather than something to inhabit. This isn't because people have lost the ability to care. It's because the structures that once held meaning have thinned. And when that happens, even strong, capable people start to feel lost. To understand why this keeps happening, not just now, but repeatedly across history, we have to zoom out even further. Because this isn't just a modern American problem, it's a human pattern. One that appears whenever societies ask work to answer questions it was never meant to answer. When patterns repeat across time, it's usually because something fundamental is being misunderstood. Societies rise and fall for many reasons, but there's one mistake that appears again and again in different forms, under different names. It happens when a society confuses function with purpose, when what people do slowly replaces who they are. Throughout history, there have been moments when work, status, and productivity became central measures of worth. In those moments, societies often appeared strong on the surface, organized, efficient, impressive. But beneath that strength, something fragile formed. People learned to tie their value to contribution, to usefulness, to output. And as long as the system rewarded them, it felt stable. But systems always change. When they do, the human cost becomes visible. Historical accounts and social studies show that when identity is built primarily on productivity, people struggle most during periods of transition, not because they lack skill, but because their sense of self has no deeper anchor. This is why times of economic or social change often trigger widespread anxiety, even without immediate collapse. The fear isn't just about survival, it's about meaning. Humans can endure hardship when they understand why it exists. They can endure effort when it's framed within something larger. But when effort becomes its own justification, endurance breaks down. This is where many societies have found themselves before. Periods of rapid growth followed by quiet emptiness, expansion followed by internal exhaustion. And what's striking is that the solution has never been simply working less or optimizing better, because the issue isn't effort, it's orientation. Work is a tool. It organizes time, it sustains life. But when it becomes the primary source of identity, it begins to demand more than it can give. It promises meaning, but delivers pressure. It promises security, but delivers conditional worth. And over time, people internalize this condition. They don't just ask, am I doing enough? They ask, am I enough? This is where anxiety deepens into something existential. Because now, failure isn't about circumstances, it's about self. Across cultures, thinkers have observed that human beings require something stable beneath their daily roles, something that doesn't fluctuate with success or failure. When that foundation is missing, people feel restless even in comfort, uncertain even in stability, anxious even in achievement. And when societies neglect this, they tend to respond the same way. They try to fix the problem with more structure, more metrics, more incentives. But pressure can't solve emptiness. Efficiency can't replace meaning. This is why modern solutions often feel insufficient. Flexible schedules help, but don't cure anxiety. Higher pay helps, but doesn't restore purpose. New opportunities help, but don't quiet the deeper unease. Because the unease isn't about logistics. It's about the question people are afraid to ask out loud. What am I worth when I stop producing? For much of human history, that question had an answer outside of work. Belonging wasn't conditional. Dignity wasn't negotiated daily. Worth wasn't recalculated every quarter. People were valued because they were human, not because they were efficient. This didn't eliminate hardship, but it grounded people through it. When that grounding erodes, people search for substitutes. They chase achievement. They chase validation. They chase constant improvement, not because they greedy or shallow, but because they trying to stabilize something that feels unsteady inside. And when no amount of progress delivers that stability, exhaustion sets in. This is where many people in America find themselves now, not broken, not incapable, but tired of carrying a weight work was never meant to hold. And this brings us to something unexpected, because long before modern economies, long before corporate culture, long before productivity metrics, there were traditions that warned about this exact mistake. Traditions that separated effort from worth, that framed work as necessary, but not sacred. That insisted human value must rest on something deeper than output. One of those traditions comes from a place many people wouldn't expect. And understanding it doesn't require belief, only attention. One of the most striking things about ancient wisdom is how often it describes modern problems with unsettling clarity. Long before offices, long before resumes, long before careers became identities, there were traditions that warned against tying human worth too closely to output. They didn't reject work. They didn't dismiss effort. They simply placed it in its proper place. One of those traditions comes from Islam. And for many people, that might already trigger assumptions. So it's important to be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't about doctrine. It isn't about culture. And it isn't about belief as an entry requirement. It's about how human value is understood. In Islamic teaching, work is necessary. Effort is honored. Excellence is encouraged. But worth does not come from productivity. Value comes from intention, character, and responsibility, things that remain even when roles change. One of the most widely accepted teachings in Islam begins with a simple idea. Actions are judged by intentions, not by outcomes alone, not by visibility, not by constant performance, by intention. That single principle quietly reshapes everything. It means effort matters even when results are uncertain. It means dignity isn't erased by circumstances. It means a person's value doesn't fluctuate with external systems. Another core idea is moderation. Islam repeatedly warns against excess. Not just excess in pleasure, but excess in striving. Excess that consumes the self. Excess that leaves no space for rest, reflection, or presence. This wasn't framed as a productivity issue. It was framed as a human one. Because when effort becomes endless, the soul thins. There's also a deep emphasis on balance. Work is part of life, not the center of it. Provision matters, but it isn't the measure of a person. Contribution is encouraged, but it isn't identity. In this framework, people are not valuable because they are useful. They are useful because they are valuable. That distinction changes how anxiety works. If worth isn't conditional, fear loses some of its grip. If meaning isn't produced, emptiness doesn't dominate. If identity rests deeper than role, change becomes survivable. Islamic teaching doesn't promise that life will be easy. It doesn't promise stability in systems. It promises steadiness in the self, a grounding that remains when circumstances shift. That grounding comes from knowing that your value isn't constantly under review, that your effort counts even when outcomes change, that rest isn't failure, that being human isn't something you have to earn. This perspective doesn't remove stress, but it changes its weight. Work becomes something you do, not something you are. Success becomes a responsibility, not a verdict. Failure becomes a condition, not an identity. And suddenly, many of the pressures people feel today make sense, not because they're weak, not because they're ungrateful, but because they've been carrying a burden that was never meant to sit on work alone. The quiet anxiety, the emptiness despite achievement, the exhaustion without collapse. They aren't personal flaws, they're signals. Signals that something fundamental has been misplaced. And what makes this moment unique isn't that people are suffering more than ever. It's that many are beginning to sense the misalignment. They feel that something about how work fits into life has drifted too far. Islam doesn't offer a modern productivity system. It offers something older and more durable, a reminder that human worth must rest on something that doesn't fluctuate with markets, titles, or output. You don't have to adopt a belief system to recognize the wisdom in that. You only have to notice what happens when work is asked to replace meaning and fails. Maybe what people are rediscovering right now isn't a new solution. Maybe it's an old one. That work matters, but it was never meant to carry the weight of who you are.